Wednesday session. My name is Jamie Shishel, and what we're going to be focusing on today is utilizing pretest within your Lectora titles. Now, with all that said, what I'm going to do first is going to go over a nice overview of variables and conditional actions and how they're going to work within Lectora. From there, we're going to jump into working with pretest and how to create the functionality with pretest. Now, I will be jumping back and forth between this overview that you currently see in front of you, as well as a template title that I'm going to be accessing to build the pretest functionality. I also want to mention the course that we're going to be using to build this functionality is available for download out on our website. So I'll mention that again towards the end of the recording or the end of the session, just so you know what you will have available for you to go back and rebuild this content. Now, in regards to working with pretests, pretests are going to be used to provide students an alternative method to complete a course and test out. So in this particular session, you're going to learn how to create custom variables, how to modify the test tracking variable, create test status navigation, and also how to successfully submit the pretest score to a learning management system. So the first thing that I want to focus on is, what are variables? Now, variables are containers of information. Think of them that way. They're going to be objects within a Lectora title that enable storage, modification, and testing of values during the runtime of a published course. Now, there are many uses for variables. Variables enable the author to capture user actions, and the captured information or the input can then be used to display objects on a page. You can enable conditional branching within your course, or simply track the progress of the user. So think of a variable as being a brown paper bag. The outside of the bag is labeled name. So let's say I have myself write my name on a piece of paper and place that piece of paper in the bag. So now the variable name, if you will, now equals Jamie. Now you might also want to think of a variable as simply being a container of information. So the value that's contained could be a number value, or it could be a text string. Now keep in mind that variables are global within your Lectora titles, meaning that they pertain to the entire title. Now let's talk about the different types of variables within Lectora. There are 3 different types that are available. The first one is going to be a reserved variable. So when a title is created, Lectora provides a number of reserved variables. These cannot be deleted or edited. These reserved variables are dependent upon the type of title and the objects used within the title. So the list of variables that you're seeing in front of you can be viewed by selecting the Variable Manager from the Tools ribbon. Some commonly used reserved variables are current date, current page name, current chapter name, and current section name. Now, in addition to reserved variables, you can also create your own variables. These are what we call user-defined. These user-defined variables can be edited and deleted. User-defined variables allow you to create custom functionality and extract any information from the learner that you desire. So these variables are kind of the power behind Lectora, if you will. Now you'll notice with user-defined variables, I kind of have a checklist over on the left-hand side of what you can actually do with them. So you can manipulate courses in regards to progress or branching. You can perform calculations, create custom questions, gaming, and badging. So you have all kinds of options right at your fingertips when you create these user-defined variables. Last but not least, you have access to what we call AICC SCORM variables. So if a Lectora title has been designated as an AICC SCORM course mill published title, you're going to have several additional variables that become available. Now, the majority of these are read-only, meaning that they are not modifiable by the course content. And these are variables that are compliant with your learning management system that communicate to your LMS and vice versa. So the example that I always like to provide is the AICC student name. So anyone that is logging into your learning management system has their own unique login. So what you can do is actually pull their AICC student name from their login and have that pulled onto the course or onto a certificate, just like you see in the example here. So once again, it's communicating from the LMS to Lectora and vice versa. Okay, the next thing I want to mention are conditional actions. So when you use variables, you can create what we call conditional actions. Conditional actions are actions that will only execute when a logical variable statement, such as my variable equals 1, is true. So you can come in and specify whether you're using a single or multiple condition for an action. And this enables you to execute the action only when the specified condition has been satisfied. So the best way I like looking at actions when you're working with conditions is think of them as if-then statements. So let's keep it simple. Let's say if question 1, because all questions have variables assigned to them, so if question 1 is correct, action to send the user in one location in your course, but if it's incorrect, send them in another direction. So you're using these conditional actions to set up branching scenarios. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before jumping into the pretest functionality are action groups. If you're not familiar with groups, think of groups as just organizing content over in that title Explore. And groups can contain basically anything. They can contain all kinds of objects, images, text blocks, audio, and action. But one thing to make note of, when a group consists entirely of actions, it is referred to as an action group. Now, since action groups allow you to do several things simultaneously, you can update a variable, you can show and hide images, show and hide questions, completely up to you, but they are often used when creating games and other simulations. One thing to make note of is remember when executing actions within a group, there has to be an action that's going to be triggered outside of the group. Okay, so now let's actually get to the pretest part. So now that you understand kind of some of the functionality that's going to go into play with these pretests, let's talk about the benefits of pretests. So pretests can be used to provide students an alternative method to complete a course. So you can have it set up to where the student must successfully complete the pretest to receive credit. and otherwise it's going to be required to review the course content and pass the overall test. Now, a test can be configured in many ways. In this particular example for the pretest, we're going to address the following. We're going to allow students only one opportunity to access the pretest. We're going to configure the pretest so that if the student passes, they receive credit for the course and the score is submitted to a learning management system. And then if the student fails the pretest, we don't want to count it against them, and he or she will be able to be redirected to the beginning of the course. So here we're going to focus on some user-defined variables, some custom navigation, and submitting the correct score to the learning management system. So what I want to do is open up the course that I'm going to be working off of. You can see it's based on the top 5 beaches of the world. Don't let that distract you right now. But what I do want you to focus on is the title Explore over on the left-hand side. So how we actually created this course, we have 3 kind of opening pages, if you will. You have your welcome page, which I'll come back to in a moment. You have the objectives for the course and course completion. You have your Beaches chapter, which contains all the main content. You have a pretest, the overall test, and you have a test results chapter that includes 2 sections, one specific for the pretest results and one specific for the test results. Each include a pass and fail page. So what we're going to do first is focus on giving the user the opportunity to access the pretest. So to complete this first objective, allowing the user to have that one opportunity to access the pretest, what we're going to do is create a user-defined variable with the following properties. We're going to create one called course access. Keep in mind, you can name your variables whatever you want. This course access variable is going to have a value of 0. Once again, you can name your values whatever you want. We always name them with a numeric value just so we can keep it organized. So this initial value of 0 is going to represent that it is the user's first time in the course. Anything other than 0 is going to represent that it's not the first time in the course. So in our case, we're going to use a value of 1. We're also going to come in and retain this variable. If you think about this, if you're allowing the user to log in and out of your course, and let's say they've already attempted to take the pretest, they failed, you want to retain that information so they're not provided with that opportunity again. So let's go ahead and set up this variable. So back in Lectora, in order to access the variable manager, you simply go to your Tools ribbon, and from here, open up Variable Manager. In the Variable Manager, underneath User Defined, I can simply select to add a new variable and call it whatever I want. So in my case, I'm going to name it Course Access. Now, no spaces are supported when you are creating variables, and I just find it to be best practice to capitalize the first letter of each word. Initial value, I'm going to leave at 0, once again, meaning that it is the user's first time in the course. And I'm going to retain the variable value between sessions so that if the student does exit the course before completing it, they will not have an additional opportunity to take the pretest. Okay, so now I'm going to close out of this manager. So now we have the variable created for this particular course. So now we have to think of our next steps. So since we're giving the user one opportunity to access the pretest on the first page of the course, we have to think about the navigation and how we're going to give them this opportunity. So let me jump back into my overview. And let's take this in consideration. So if they're given one opportunity to access the pretest, what we're going to do in this example is work with the pretest button and the pretest text. Now, you have to think about this from a logical standpoint. We only want the text and the button to show if they've not been given the opportunity to take the pretest. So let's take a look at this. So if I go back into my Lectora title, over on my welcome page, I currently have a test group that contains my pretest text as well as my Take Pretest button. Now, if I go into my run mode right now, these two objects are currently showing. We only want these to show if it is the user's first time within the course. So what we're going to do back in edit mode is we're going to make sure that this pretest group is set up within the properties to be initially hidden. Because we only want them to see it, like I said, if it is their first time in the course. So now, that Take Pretest button, which will be set eventually to direct the student to the pretest, and the pretest text is set to be initially visible. What we're going to have to do is set up an action on the page to now show these objects within that pretest group if it is the first time that the student is accessing the course. So now, if I go to my welcome page, I can simply add an action to the page. Now I'm going to name this action Show Pretest Group. So upon show of my welcome page, the action that's going to execute is that I want to show, and the target that I want to show is going to be my pretest group. So that contains my text and the button for the pretest. But I only want to show this group based on a condition. So I'm only going to show this if my course access variable is equal to 0. So if it is equal to 0, this is technically the user's first time on the course. Okay. So now that we have the functionality set up to show those objects, what we have to do next is determine where in the course we need to modify the course access variable to now represent that is no longer the student's first time in the course. So, for example, we are going to modify this variable if the student decides to either take the pretest, so they would either click on the Take Pretest button, or simply navigate to the next page, because that's their one opportunity. So we're going to add actions to both the next and pretest button. So I'm going to start off with the Take Pretest button. And I'm going to simply add an action. And I'm going to name this action Modify Course Access Variable. So I'm going to leave the trigger upon mouse click. The action that's going to take place here is that I want to modify my variable. And the variable that I'm modifying for my target is course access. And I'm going to set it equal to a value of 1. So keep in mind, this is going back to our key. That 0 represents that it is the first time in the course. 1 represents that it's not the first time in the course. So these values eventually get assigned to objects as you're building out this functionality. So in this case, it's getting assigned to actual navigation within our course. Now, we also have to set up navigation on this Take Pretest button, because right now we're just saying, okay, modify the variable, set it equal to 1. So that's telling Lectora that now it's not the first time in the course. But I also have to add another action to actually send the user to the pretest. And it's that simple. All you're going to do is set up basic navigation. When they click on it, they go to the pretest. Now, one thing to be cautious of is the order of these actions over in your Title Explorer. Lectora does execute everything from the top down over in this Title Explorer. So you want to make sure that you modify that variable first, and then the navigation comes second. Now, these exact same actions are going to be placed on the Go to Next Page button. So I'm just going to copy and paste. So when they click on the Next button on this page, we still want to modify the course access variable, set it equal to a value of 1. And then we also want to set up navigation. We obviously don't want to send them to the pretest, but we're going to send them to the next page. So the target needs to be updated accordingly. So now if I go to test this out, if I go into my run mode, I should see my Take Pretest text and my Take Pretest button. I can either click on the pretest button or the next button. Either one of these are going to modify my course access variable, set it equal to a value of 1. I'm going to do the next button just for time's sake. So as soon as I click on next, let's say I come back to that welcome page, I no longer have the opportunity to take the pretest. So my Take Pretest button and text are no longer visible because that was my one shot. Okay, so now that you guys understand kind of the initial setup for pretest, let's kind of jump down to the next step, which is going to be working with modifying the pretest properties. So here's the thing. Lectora gives the author of a title many different options for grading tests. So if multiple tests are included within a title, the test scores can simply be combined for an overall score. Or the author can choose one of the test scores to report. So the best way to set up a pretest is to manually submit the score to the learning management system. So in this case, the score will only be submitted when the student has passed the pretest. So to complete this objective, if you will, what we have to do is go into our test properties and unselect the option to include the test score and overall score. So this will ensure that the appropriate navigation is set to accommodate those students who pass and those who fail. So if I go back into my Lectora title, I can simply select my pretest. And you'll notice with all tests, you always have a results ribbon. And within the results ribbon, you can simply unselect that option to include tests and overall score. So eventually we'll come to the point where we actually do submit this score to the learning management system. But right now, we don't want to submit both pretest and the test. Okay, so now our next step is going to be working with test tracking. So here we're going to have to create a variable that's going to allow us to track the student's test progress. So this variable will tell us if the test was attempted, passed, or failed. So we're going to create a variable with the following. It's going to be called test status. We're going to set it to a value of 0, and we're going to retain this information. Now, this particular variable will have 3 possible values. A value of 0, which means that the test has not been taken. A value of 1, meaning that the test has been passed. Or a value of 2, which means the test has been failed. So let's go ahead, create this variable. Once again, I can be anywhere in my title Explore because variables are global. But I'm going to go to my Tools ribbon, open up my Variable Manager, and I'm going to create a new variable and name it Test Status. I'm going to leave it equal to a value of 0, which is going to mean to us that the test has not been taken. And I'm going to retain this variable value between sessions. Click OK and close out. So now that this variable has been created, what we're going to do next is set up actions to set the value of this variable appropriately. So these actions will be executed on both the congratulations pages within the test results chapter. So this is going to allow us to track both the pretest and the final test. So you're going to notice in my example here, I have the variable for test pass 1. So since we are creating this functionality on both pass pages, we can track both the pretest and the final test. And then we're going to have to tell Lectora if the user did fail the test. So let's jump back into our course to see how this is set up. So back over in my title Explore, I have my test results chapter that includes both sections for pretest and test results, pass and fail pages. I'm going to work with the first one for pretest underneath the pretest pass page. So we have to indicate that the test has been passed by working with the test status variable we just created. So with my pretest pass page selected, I'm going to simply insert an action. And I'm going to name this modify test status, set it equal to 1. So upon show of this page, the action that's going to execute is that I want to modify my variable. The variable that I'm modifying is my test status variable that I just created, and I'm setting this equal to a value of 1. So once again, this is just telling Lectora that the user has passed the test. So now we also need to place this exact same action on the pass page for the overall test. So the test passed. I'm just going to copy and paste because it's the exact same thing. So if a student passes the pretest and let's say enters the course a second time, they're not going to be given access to the final test. That's why this functionality is being set up in both locations. Now we also have to set up the functionality to indicate that the student has failed the test. So we're going to place this on the test fail page within the test results chapter. I'm going to paste that same action, but this time I'm going to set this test status variable to a value of 2. Once again, this is just representing that the test has been failed. So eventually this is going to kind of correspond with resetting the test. So modifying this test status variable. And then I also want you to take in consideration why we did not place this on the pretest fail page. So we do not need to know if the student did fail the pretest because we're not counting it against them. So keep in mind, if they do fail the pretest, they're still going to have access to everything else within the course. Okay. So now what we have to do is work with the navigation. So we've set up kind of the hidden functionality, if you will, but now we have to work with the test status navigation. So in this example, the navigation has been set up so that the student will always come back to the course objectives page before accessing the test. So on this course objectives page, we have to set up the navigation accordingly. There's going to be 3 different scenarios. We need to reset the test if the test has been previously failed. We have to set up navigation to go to the test if taking it for the first time or retaking after a failed attempt. And we have to set up navigation to go to the pass page if the test has been passed already. This is going to take 2 actions. So back within my title, I'm going to locate my course completion page, and you're going to notice there's a custom next button on this page, and this is where we're going to set up the navigation. So we're going to add 2 actions to the custom next button to accommodate those scenarios that I just gave you. We want to make sure that the reset test action is triggered first and the navigation second. So with this next button selected, I'm going to select to add an action, and this is going to be programmed to reset test. So upon mouse click of the next button, we're going to access the action called reset test, and the target we want to reset is the test, so the overall test. But we only want to reset this test if they have previously failed it. So we have to set up a condition to tell Lectora only reset this if our test status variable is equal to a value of 2. Okay, so if it's equal to a value of 2, reset the test. But now we have to set up the navigation. So I'm going to leave that action selected. I'm going to add another action. I'm just going to name this navigation. So initially what's going to happen is we're going to send the user to the test. So upon mouse click of this button, we want to go to, and the target that we want to go to is the test. But we only want to send the user to the test based on a condition that our test status variable is not equal to a value of 1. So think about this. If it's not equal to 1, it's then equal to either 0 or 2. So let's go back to our overview. So 0 means the test has not been taken. So that way, yes, we still want to send them to the test. And 2 means that it's been failed. So if it's not equal to 1, obviously it's equal to either 0 or 2. And that way they'll have access to the test. So once we have our condition in place, we're then going to work with this else action. So let's say that it is equal to 1, meaning that they pass the test. We're then going to send them, so go to, and in this case, we're looking for the test pass page for the test results. So once again, you're just kind of setting up some conditional branching based on that test status variable, and in this case saying, whoops, I did test score. It should be test status is not equal to 1. So if they did not take the test already, or if they failed, send them to the test. Once again, keep in mind the order of the navigation and the actions over in your Title Explorer definitely do matter. You want to make sure that you reset that test first if it's been failed, and then set up the navigation accordingly. Okay. All right, so now what we have to do is continue working with the test status navigation. There are going to be 3 additional actions that are needed to determine whether the user has never taken the test, whether they passed, or failed. So to display this information, we've just created 3 different text blocks that have been set up on the course completion page. So going back into my title, you'll notice you have a specific text block called Test Specifics. You have one for Test Passed and one for Test Failed. All 3 of these are already programmed to be initially hidden on the page, and we're going to program these to show based on what the user has done within the course. So with course completion selected, I'm going to add my first action, and I'm going to name this Show Test Specifics. So upon show of the page, I want to show in my target test specifics. But I only want to show this text block to the user based on my test status variable being equal to a value of 0. So this test specifics means that the test has not been taken. Click OK. For time's sake, I'm just going to copy and paste this action. So the second one is going to be programmed to now show test passed. So we want to show the test passed text block based on the condition that our test status variable is now equal to a value of 1. So keep in mind, we set up these same values, so a value of 1 on the past pages within our test results chapter. We've set it up on the navigation to go to one direction versus the other. So you can see how all of these values are now kind of tying together. And then we have to set up one more action to tell Lectora to show the test failed. And we're only going to show that text block based on that test status value being equal to 2. So right now, if I go into run mode, I'm going to see the test specifics because I've not yet attempted the test. So this Beaches title has been set up so that students will always navigate back to this course completion page before accessing the test. So this allows us control over the information displayed on the page and the navigation based on a particular scenario. So we've got to do one more thing to kind of wrap this up. Let's go back to our overview. And the last step is going to be to submit the pretest score. So in order to submit this pretest score to the learning management system, you have to add an action to the past page within the test results chapter, which is in your pretest results section. So this manual action is needed because we previously deselected the include test score and overall score from the pretest properties. So turning this functionality off means Lectora will not automatically submit the student's score. Now, keep in mind that the AICC score variable, which is what we're going to use here, is only available if you set up your title as being designated as an AICC SCORM Course No Published title. This is actually set within the title options from the design ribbon. So with that said, if I go back into my Lectora title, into my design ribbon, within title options, this is where you can designate the type of title that you're working with. So if you turn on AICC SCORM, what happens here is you now have access to all kinds of additional variables within your reserved menu. So now you have access to all these AICC SCORM variables that are compliant with your learning management system and vice versa. So we're going to focus on the one called AICC score. Think of this as the container that's sitting out on your learning management system that's empty. It's not going to get filled with that score until the score from your Lectora title gets submitted, so whether it be from your pretest or the overall test. Well, in our case, we need to submit the pretest score to the LMS. Well, we already know, because when we created the pretest and the test, that in the Behavior tab, that when the user does pass the pretest, they're going to be directed to that pretest pass page. So that's exactly where we're going to set up the functionality to submit the score to the LMS. So over my Title Explorer, my pretest pass page is selected. I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to name this action Modify AICC Score. This is kind of a hidden variable, if you will, or hidden action within your content. And you're going to tell Lectora, upon show of this page, modify your variable. The target that you're modifying is the one called AICC score. And you're going to set this equal to, and in our case, a value of 100, because that's what the user needs to receive in order to pass the pretest. Now, yes, you could get creative here and add conditions with different score options, but in this case, it's kind of 100 or nothing in order to pass the pretest. But this will deliver the information over to your learning management system. So as you can see, there's a lot of hidden functionality that takes place with these custom user-defined variables. But once you kind of have this set up, it's a very easy process to allow your user to access pretest, test out of the course, and submit that information accordingly. So overall, that's going to be the overview for working with pretest within Lectora. So I do want to go ahead and open up the floor to you guys to see if you have any questions. I know Gina's been over there answering away, so let me see if she has any that she's not been able to get to. So one question that just came through, in the learning management system, can you tell if the 100 came from the pretest or the final test? That's all going to be in the naming convention of the test itself. Those variables should transfer over. So if you name your test pretest, yes, it should transfer over. Obviously, if you name your test something else within your Title Explorer, that's going to transfer over. Because you'll notice, and let me just kind of open this up here, whenever you create a test within Lectora, a variable automatically gets created for it. So here I have my pretest score, so that should be submitted over to your LMS with the AICC score, and then you should have one somewhere in this list for test score. So that should also go over to your LMS as well. One question that came through, is there a way to have a score sent to someone via email? That one's going to get a little bit tricky because of how these variables get retained within your content. Your learning management system does store everything within your Lectora content. Now, let's say that you're not working with an LMS and you're storing your courses out on your company intranet. So in Lectora, you're publishing the HTML. So let's say I log into a course on my computer, everything gets retained within the cookies of that PC. But if I log in from another computer, obviously that's going to be a whole different situation. So this does work best with a learning management system. Submitting it via email is going to be just a little bit trickier, all because of how these variables do get retained. Another question that came through, upon passing, we send the student to the certificate. That is done within the test behavior tab. So yes, keep in mind, when you create any type of test within Lectora, you have a behavior tab that automatically gets created. So here, if they complete the course or complete the test, I should say, you set up whatever page you want to send them to within your course. If they cancel out or fail the test, once again, you set up where you want to send them within the course. So just keep in mind, there are hundreds of different ways of creating content within Lectora, setting up pre-tests. So this is just one example that we came up with in order to set up this functionality. So you guys might come up with a different way or set up different options. So you have all kinds of options right at your fingertips. Another question that came through, what if the score of the pretest is less than 100? How do we send the actual score? Same concept. Once again, if you have your pretest created, in your results tab, you determine the lowest passing score. And then when that gets submitted over to your learning management system, you can set up the action to work with that particular score. So you can definitely have it say 85 or above, and then have that submitted over. So that's all going to be based on setting up conditional actions to work with the actual score itself. Okay, so it looks like Gina pretty much answered all the other questions. So we should be good to go. So what I want to do is go ahead and wrap up this session. Keep in mind that this has been recorded. So if you do want to access this, it should be available by early next week. Also, the Beaches title that I've been working off of is available for download out on our website within the Lectora University. You also have access to all kinds of archived webinars, video tutorials, and much more. So please use this Lectora University to your benefit. If you guys do have any requests for a future Inspiration Wednesday session, please submit those to us. You can actually submit them within the questions panel now, or I'll also put out there in the chat window my contact information. You can definitely email me with any questions or any type of future recommendations for these Inspiration Wednesday sessions. We definitely take everything in consideration. So I went ahead and placed my contact information within the chat window that GoToMeeting does provide. It's just jamie.shishel@trivanis.com. Besides that, I do want to thank everyone for their time this afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you.